Thank you, Professor Nariti, for the introduction. As you mentioned, my talk today will concern some data that we collected on a parabolic flight while performing drop jumps, indeed on a variable gravity environment. And specifically, we focused our attention on muscle fascicle and sarcomere behavior. So this talk, differently from the previous ones, will be more about the acute responses instead of chronic ones. So first of all, why did we choose a drop jump to study muscle behavior, and what is a drop jump? A drop jump is performed when a subject falls from a certain height, reaches the ground, and suddenly rebounds to perform a vertical jump. The very short time lag between the landing and the rebounding phases allows the development of a phenomenon called stride shortening cycle. And we know that stride shortening cycle activities are very common in human movement. For example, they are not only exploited while jumping, but also when running. So we were very interested in understanding muscle behavior during the performance of a common daily life movement. And we used a drop jump because this is a widely employed model to study muscle behavior. During a drop jump, we can recognize three different phases. The first is the pre-activation phase, from when the subject leaves the platform until when the subject reaches the ground, where the central nervous system must pre-activate the lower limb motor units in order to stiffen the joints and generate a muscle contraction that will break the fall upon ground contact. The second phase, that is the landing phase, goes from the initial ground contact until the minimum ankle joint is reached. And in this phase, the central nervous system must fix the fascicle length in order to allow for tendon elongation and storage of elastic energy, which is then released in the last and third push-off phase, which precedes the rebounds. Now, all these behavior, the behavior of the lower limbs during drop jumps have been widely described while jumping in at the Earth's gravity conditions that I will refer from now on as 1G, while nothing is known concerning the regulation and muscle fascicle behavior in conditions different from 1G, so either below or above. So the aim of the present study raised from some open questions, which specifically were how are muscle fascicle regulated in preparation and during landing while jumping in variable gravity levels. And we also wonder which could be the average sarcomere operative length during the different jump phases while jumping. So to reply to our questions, to answer to our questions, we set up experiments during a parabolic flight, which typically performs, as the name suggests, repeated parabolas in the sky, with the plane flying from a height of about 5,000 meters and reaching the top of the parabola around the height of 8,500 meters. The parabola typically starts with the plane flying in 1G, the so-called steady flight condition, and afterwards the plane starts to ascend the parabola by enters an hypergravity phase until it reaches an inclination of about 50 degrees, after which it reaches the top of the parabola, entering a free fall phase lasting about 20-30 seconds. And afterwards, it starts to descend the parabola, entering a second hypergravity phase, which ends with a new steady flight phase. We collected our jumps during the transition phases that you can see here in highlighted in the picture, in order to collect jumps in gravities ranging from about 0 to about 2, that is about double the Earth's gravity. We basically participated in ESA's parabolic flight campaign, where 3 flights were performed in 3 different days. And each flight consisted of 30 parabolas, where we tested 2 subjects per flight. So we tested subjects for about 15 parabolas, collecting a total of around 90 drop jumps per subject. Our data collection included baseline measurements performed either on the plane before starting to fly or during steady flight, and the in-flight measurements, so during the parabolas. And we recorded an ultrasound videos of the gastrocnemius medialis. You can see here the probe was firmly fixed to the leg. And from this video, we calculated muscle fascicle length, and we also recorded through electromyography gastrocnemius medialis and tibialis anterior muscle activity. We also recorded ground reaction forces through a force platform and the kinetics through a goniometer placed on the ankle angle. Here I reported to you a brief video. You can see this is the phase of free fall of the parabola, where the subject has jumped only once. And you'll see now that gravity comes back and we are entering the hypergravity phase. So the subject is required to jump again in hypergravity. During the baseline data collection, what we firstly did was we measured at rest an ultrasound video of the gastrocnemius medialis with the subject bipedally standing on the platform. You can see here, this is a typical image from a representative subject. This is the fascicle length. And in this way, we obtained a resting length position, a resting length of fascicles in this reference position. And afterwards, we required our subject to jump, and we recorded again an ultrasound video while jumping. And we considered for the analysis 5 different jump time moments, which were the drop off. That is the moment before the subject started to fall, while having his leg fully raised. The 100 milliseconds before ground contact, so during the pre-activation phase. Ground contact, that is the end of the pre-activation phase and the beginning of the landing phase. The minimum ankle joint representing the end of the landing phase, and the push-off that represents the moment just before leaving the ground. The same measurement and analysis were run for the jumps performed during the parabolas. And in order to understand in which gravity our subjects were jumping, we also recorded accelerometer data, and we averaged the instantaneous gravity in the 5 jump time moments, so drop off, ground contact, push off, etc., to have an average gravity in which each jump was performed. And we finally clustered our jumps in 9 gravity levels, 4, as you see here, above 1G, 4 below 1G, and 1G, each one spanning from about 0.25 G. In order to have an average estimation of sarcomere operative length, what we did was that we took the gastrocnemius medialis resting fascicle length measured at rest bipedally standing, and we divided this length by the sarcomere resting length measured by Sanchez and colleague in vivo in the same ankle position. And we obtain an estimation of the number of sarcomeres in each participant gastrocnemius medialis. With this number, we divided the gastrocnemius medialis fascicle length in each jump moment or time point, and for the estimated sarcomere number. And we obtain an estimation of the sarcomere operating length in each jump phase. In the end, we superimposed this sarcomere length to Walker and Schroed length tension relationship. Concerning our results in 1G, so the Earth's gravity, you can see here, this is the percentage length of fascicles variation from the drop off until the push off. You can see that during pre-activation, as expected, as reported in the literature, muscle fascicles shortened, and afterwards behaved quasi-isometrically during the landing phase to allow for tendon elongation, and they further shortened slightly during the push-off. When we superimpose the calculated sarcomere working length to the length tension relationship, we observe that at drop-off, sarcomere length was very close to the plateau region of this relationship. So ideally, the region where the sarcomeres can develop the highest amount of forces, and shifted in the ascendant limb of the length tension relationship during the performance of the jump, as previously shown also for other movements such as running or squat jumping. You can see here that what really caught our attention was that at push off, so the moment just before rebouncing, sarcomere length were extremely short, being about 1.5 micrometers, which is a length at which we know that the contact between Z line and thick filaments limits the amount of force that the sarcomere can produce, which indeed you can see is about the 40%. However, we have to consider that in this moment, so at the push-off, potentially the majority of the energy needed for the following rebounds is provided by the tendon recoil, and this sarcomere length seems to confirm this hypothesis, also supported by the fact that the electromyographical activity of the gastrocnemius medialis was significantly reduced at this time point. When we moved our attention to hypogravity, we observed that the length of the fascicles already at drop-off was shorter in hypogravity, although not significantly, than in 1G, and this was accompanied by a more plantar flexed ankle angle, which was followed by a lower shortening of the fascicles during pre-activation, confirmed by a lower activity of the gastrocnemius medialis. And we observed that the quasi-isometric phase observable in 1G was substituted by a slight lengthening in hypogravity. However, interestingly, at push-off, all the fascicle length were similar to that observed in 1G, and the jump was effectively performed. And this was visible also when we superimposed our sarcomere operative length to the length tension curves. You can see that at drop-off, sarcomeres were shorter than in 1G, but at push-off, they more or less reached a similar length, excluding the lowest gravity level from 0 to 0.25 G. And a similar pattern, although more marked, was observable in hypergravity, where fascicle length was significantly shorter at drop-off if compared to 1G, with a significantly higher, more plantar flexed ankle angle. Again, a lower muscle activity led to less muscle fascicle shortening. However, fascicles since started by being much more shortened were significantly shorter at ground contact if compared to 1G. And the quasi-isometric phase was again substituted by a significant stretching. But once again, we observed that at push-off, fascicle length were similar between hypergravity and 1G. And this was observable again also in our sarcomere operative length. So to briefly sum up, what we observed was that at drop-off, we saw a shorter fascicle length and sarcomere length, potentially linked due to the increased plantar flexion and also in hypergravity to higher gastrocnemius medialis activation. And then in the pre-activity phase, we observe less shortening in both hypo and hypergravity, possibly due to the lower gastrocnemius medialis activation, which would lead to an increased compliance of the muscle. And that the quasi-isometric behavior observable in 1G during the landing was lost, substituted by a lengthening. But noteworthy, similar lengths were reached at the minimum ankle joint and maintained at push-off, where the jump could be effectively performed. The extremely short sarcomere length seems to be justified by the fact that the tendon seems to provide the majority of the energy needed for the following rejump. And so my take-home message for this study would be that there seems to be some kind of neuromuscular wisdom that enables to regulate finally muscle fascicles and, as we estimated, sarcomere length during jumps, not only while we jump in a 1G condition, but also in a known and challenging condition. And this allows to safely and effectively perform drop jumps also when jumping in gravities different from 1G. Finally, I would like to thank all the collaborators who performed the experiments with us and you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you indeed. And again, very nice presentation. And I'm glad you managed to make your presentation, your feet on the ground. So any questions from the audience?
I have a question.
Please, I thought Richard
Yeah,
have one.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciated that work. That's a lot of work. I can only imagine how hard that is. I'm not surprised at your sarcomere length changes. I am a little surprised at the range. And of course, as you know, the myosin filament is 1.6 microns long, and those very short sarcomere lengths are, I think you have a built-in assumption based on the literature value for resting sarcomere length that you used, which I think is a huge assumption. And the other unknown, of course, is the amount of shortening that can occur due to tendon elongation. And I'll just tell you, even in frog muscle, when we know exactly how long the fibers are and exactly how long the tendons are and the material properties of the tendons, we have a hard time predicting sarcomere shortening. So I think that's an area, and we've raised it a couple of times in this discussion. I think that's an area of great unknown that none of us has really solved yet. So I guess my real question is, do you believe that sarcomeres go to 1.3 microns during these hypergravity functions?
So I know the assumptions from which we started are, we knew this was just an estimation because, as you mentioned, it's very difficult to predict. Also, we know that sarcomeres do not potentially have the same length across the muscle belly while contracting. So what I am certain about is that we try to be as close as possible to reality, but I would say that potentially sarcomeres might be a bit longer, at least a bit long, slightly longer than 1.6 micrometers, which is the length of the thick filament. So that is my guess, but I wouldn't say much longer.
Yes, indeed, this is a very, very good question. And we were also extremely surprised at this very short sarcomere length. And together with Carlo Reggiani, we reasoned a lot on this. And Carlo, I don't know if you would like to add some comments on this. Yes, we do.
I remember that you also recorded or estimated some very short sarcomere length, for example, in wrist movement.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's a bit surprising, but maybe there are some conditions where sarcomere can shorten so much. I mean, I'm rather fixed at the tension length curve, and is a very important point to regulate the contractile force. But still, we have this surprising indication from different sources, completely independent, that in some cases, the complete region from the upper left right side to the lower left side of the sarcomere length is traveled during a contraction. And remember that you measured in the movement of the wrist, no? Here the hand moving in this way, no? And this was in vivo, no? Was measured.
Correct. Yeah, I just put that slide in my next talk, so I'll talk about it in a second. Just popped it in based on Elena's talk.
Looking forward to that.
Okay.
Any more questions?